The Federation diplomatic shuttle descended through the violet clouds of the planet Alaris. Darien stood close to the small viewport, looking down at the crystal towers of the capital Valoria. He had been through dozens of campaigns, but had never seen a world that felt both so beautiful and so uneasy. Beside him, Ambassador Celine calmly reviewed her speech on a holoscreen. "Our mission is to mend, not to threaten," Celine reminded him, her eyes never leaving the lines of text. Darien nodded, but his hand kept drifting, out of habit, to the empty holster at his hip. The Federation's orders were clear. No weapons, only a ceremonial diplomatic reception. The ship's intercom crackled to life, announcing that they were about to land in Royal Square. As the shuttle touched down, Darien drew a deep breath and straightened the dark blue dress uniform of a Federation security officer. The hatch opened, and a wave of warm air mixed with a faint ozone smell flooded in at once. Darien stepped out first as protocol demanded, his eyes sweeping quickly across the square. Instead of banners and music, he saw only rows of Alari's soldiers forming a tight ring of steel. In the center of the square stood a dark stone platform, and high above it hung a huge, ancient suit of armor traced with glowing blue veins. "Looks more like an execution scaffold than a red carpet," Darien muttered. On a high balcony, Thalia appeared in a black ceremonial dress streaked with silver, her pale hair tied up, her blue eyes staring down. Darien felt the knot in his stomach tighten when he noticed the absence of any cheering crowds or festival bands. There was only silence, armor, and the cold gazes of Alaris nobility. Varric, in a deep purple council cloak, stepped out beside Thalia and raised his hand to demand absolute silence. "The Federation arrives late," Varric's voice boomed across the square. "Our king is dead, and at the same time, a secret signal was sent from your ship." Celine moved forward, wearing a flawless diplomatic smile, but her voice was edged with steel. "Ambassador Celine, representing the Federation, offers deepest condolences and requests a joint investigation." Varric ignored the offer, his eyes settling on Darien, as if choosing prey in advance. "Darien, security officer of the Federation, is charged with directly coordinating the assassination signal," Varric declared. The accusation dropped into the square like a blade, and the Alari's soldiers all tightened their grips on their weapons. "That is slander," Celine reacted instantly, but Torin had already signaled the Royal Guard to surround them. Darien instinctively lifted his arm in front of Celine, even though he knew he had no weapon at all. Thalia took one step forward, her blue eyes narrowing slightly as she looked down at Darien from afar. "The Council has agreed to use the judgment right to prove guilt," Varric continued, his voice full of triumph. Elion, the elderly high priest in white robes, walked slowly out from the base of the platform, holding a glowing golden scroll. "The sacred aegis will judge the soul of the accused," Elion intoned, hesitation flickering in his eyes when he saw Darien. Darien's hands were bound with energy cuffs by Alaris soldiers, and he was shoved toward the stone platform in the middle of the square. Each step on the gray stone rang like a hammer driving nails into a coffin in his mind. When Darien looked up, the massive armor hanging above seemed to stare straight back at him through the slits of its dark mask. Elion stood beside the platform, placing his hand on a surface carved with ancient symbols as he began to activate the rite. The veins on the Aegis armor slowly brightened, shedding a cold blue light like water from the depths of the sea. Varric raised his hand, turning toward the mass of soldiers and nobles watching from all sides. "Before Alaris, and beneath the eyes of the stars, the traitor shall be judged," Varric shouted. The crowd roared a single word in unison, sending waves of sound crashing around the square. "Execute!" The first surge of energy from the Aegis armor crashed down like a bolt of blue lightning, washing over Darien as he knelt on the stone. The blue lightning from the Aegis armor slammed into Darien, burning across his skin with a sensation that was both freezing and searing. Darian clenched his teeth, waiting for his body to be drained, but instead he felt thousands of invisible metal threads sweeping through each of his thoughts. Strange whispers in an unknown language echoed inside his skull, making it impossible for Darian to tell which voice was his and which was something else. Outside, the blue veins on the Aegis armor suddenly changed direction, no longer pouring into the stone, but spiraling around Darian's body. Elion's eyes widened, and he stepped back as the ancient symbols on the platform lit up in a pattern he had never seen before. "The right is reversed," Elion whispered, scarcely believing his own words. Varric clenched his jaw, turning to Thalia with a look that tried to force her into agreement. "Stop the right at once!" Varric shouted down, his voice betraying a hint of panic. But the frame holding the Aegis armor shook violently, breaking free from its supports and releasing each piece of armor from its mount. The pieces floated in the air like a school of metal fish, circling the kneeling Darian. Darian's eyes flew open as he tried to move, but the energy cuffs pinned him to the cold stone. A breastplate drifted up before his face, tilting as if considering, then clamped down onto Darian's chest with a solid, locking force. Darian shouted more from shock than pain, as it felt like a second metal heart began beating in sync with his own. Then came the pauldrons, arm guards, and greaves, each piece finding its place as if Darian had been born to wear them. The final helm piece dropped down, enclosing Darian's face, leaving only his eyes flickering blue behind the visor. The crowd fell silent, then erupted into chaotic screams as they realized the condemned man had donned the sacred armor. Some Alari soldiers dropped to their knees, pounding fists against their chests as if before a god, while others lifted their weapons in hatred. "He is a false god, not a savior," Varric roared, pointing directly at Darian. "All units, shoot him down now," Varric ordered, his voice cracking with panic and rage. Torin ground his teeth, looking from Varric to Thalia, and then down at Darian, before reluctantly raising his hand to signal the snipers. A volley of energy bolts tore through the air, all aimed straight at Darian on the platform. Instinctively, Darian raised his hand, and the Aegis responded with a blazing shield dome that burst outward around him. The bolts scattered like stardust, slamming into the walls and shattering stone reliefs, but never touching Darian. A large chunk of stone fell toward a cluster of soldiers below, but Darian's shield expanded just in time to catch it. Inside the helmet, Darian panted as alien readouts slid across his vision in Alaris glyphs that shifted into Federation text. A line of text appeared before Darian's eyes. "Compatibility. Confirmed. Bearer. Selected." A metallic voice echoed in his mind, clearer this time, calling his name in an ancient Alaris accent. "Darian. Chosen," the voice said, like a verdict that had been waiting for a very long time. On the balcony, Thalia watched the scene with a mix of alarm and something that looked like recognition. Thalia remembered the final line of the prophecy Elion had once whispered to her in private. "The falsely condemned will awaken the divine shield in the darkest hour." Without hesitating further, Thalia stepped up onto the railing and leaped off the high balcony into the square. Darian saw Thalia falling, and before he could think, swept his arm, letting the energy field curve into a ramp to catch her. Thalia slid along the radiant surface and landed on the platform right in front of Darian, her ceremonial skirts sweeping across the stone. Through the helmet visor, Thalia looked straight into Darian's glowing blue eyes. "Listen to me, Darian," Thalia said softly, loud enough only for him and Elion below the platform to hear. "The Aegis has chosen you. If you stay here, they will destroy you, and it," Thalia said, her eyes never leaving Darian's visor. Then Thalia turned around and raised her voice so the entire square could hear. "By royal authority, I order that the Guardian be taken to the containment vaults beneath the palace," Thalia declared. The Alari soldiers hesitated, unsure whether to obey Thalia's order or Varric's command to shoot. Varric rushed to the balcony edge, shouting, "Torin, arrest Thalia and Darian at once!" Torin positioned himself between Varric and the stairway down, one hand on his sword hilt, his eyes cold as steel. "I serve the throne, not your fear," Torin said bluntly. On the platform, Thalia turned back to Darian, lowering her voice. "There is a passage under the dais. Your armor will show you the way. Darian looked down, and glowing lines appeared in his vision, sketching the hidden structure beneath the stone. He lifted his foot, channeled power through the armor, and drove a heavy stomp into the center of the platform. The stone floor split open, revealing a glowing metal ring beneath, and a cold draft rising from a deep tunnel. Thalia grabbed Darian's armored arm and pulled him close to the opening. "Let's go, Guardian," Thalia said, this time with no tremor in her voice. Darian glanced back and saw Celine held tightly by Alaris soldiers, their eyes meeting in a heavy, wordless moment. Celine gave a small shake of her head, signaling that he had to go, her lips forming something like, "Don't waste this chance." Darian clenched his fist, then jumped into the tunnel with Thalia and Elion, leaving the square above choked in smoke and screams. The circular hatch slowly closed above them, cutting off the pale blue glow of the Aegis from the red flames raging on Alaris's surface. They dropped through the dark shaft for a few tense seconds before a lift platform slowly decelerated and touched down in a stone corridor deep beneath Alaris. The blue light from Darian's Aegis armor was the main illumination, reflecting off walls carved with ancient symbols. Thalia pulled up the hood of her ceremonial robe and lowered her voice. "These tunnels are older than the palace above. Our ancestors built them to escape another war, with something I fear is returning," Thalia said. Elion panted softly, one hand braced against the wall, yet his eyes glinted with excitement. "I never thought I would see the sacred armor awaken again, much less guide us," Elion whispered. Inside his visor, Darian saw a soft blue arrow appear, pointing deeper down, along with the words, "Entrance, Root Sanctum." "The Aegis just named where we're going," Darian said, his voice echoing faintly inside the helmet. Thalia frowned slightly. "Root Sanctum. Our ancestors called it Sanctum Primus. Few even remember the way." They turned a corner and faced a massive round door of black metal, covered in spiraling rings of ancient Alaris sigils. Elion stepped forward, trembling as he placed his hand on a ring of symbols. But nothing happened beyond a few weak sparks. "It has slept too long," Elion murmured, pulling his hand back. At that moment, the Aegis on Darian's arm glowed brighter, blue veins extending into an energy field that reached out to touch the door. The symbols on the door flared to life, rotating like gears to form an image resembling an eye, staring directly at Darian. A deep, resonant voice echoed in Darian's mind. "Bearer of the divine shield, confirmed." The round door began to turn, each layer retracting inward, revealing a deep darkness beyond. Thalia swallowed hard, gripping her robe. "We're the first to enter here, in centuries." They stepped into the Root Sanctum, an immense space with a vaulted ceiling studded with glowing crystals like a starry sky. In the center of the floor lay a great stone circle, its heart a clear blue crystal, whose surface carried floating golden glyphs with no visible support. Elion nearly dropped to his knees at the sight, his hands trembling as he spread them. The memory pillar, still active. Darian felt the Aegis resonating with the crystal, streams of ancient data sliding across his vision for a heartbeat. Thalia touched the stone ring's surface, triggering a halo of light that surrounded all three of them. "Here, the prophecy has never been cut," Thalia said, looking up as the vault transformed into a painting of light. On the ceiling, images formed. A warrior in Aegis armor standing amid a sea of darkness, Alaris cities burning behind him. A line of golden text appeared before Darian as an ancient voice rose from everywhere. "The divine shield chooses only the one hound by guilt that is not his own." Thalia glanced at Elion, as if seeking confirmation that she hadn't misheard a first line that already contradicted the trial above. The voice continued, "The falsely condemned will awaken the divine shield in the dark hour, or this world will be hollowed out." Darian clenched his armored fist and looked at the other two. So Varric deliberately read half of it to fit his execution show. Elion bowed his head, his voice bitter. "I warned the council, but Varric forbade any mention of the falsely condemned part. Because if the sacred armor chose someone from the Federation, the whole story of an assassination plot collapses," Thalia said, her voice growing cold. Darian looked up at the ceiling where the light painting shifted. The Aegis had once clad many forms, not just Alari's bodies. Some warriors were tall, some short. Some had bodies so close to human that Darian shivered. "You are not the first non-Alaris the armor has chosen," Elion said, his eyes never leaving those shapes. Darian turned back, his voice hoarse. "So your ancestors seeded something across worlds?" Elion hesitated, then nodded. "Not full species, but code fragments. A kind of biological key, so the shield would always have a chance to find a match. Your Federation's worlds are only some of many places where those keys were sown," Elion continued. Thalia drew a deep breath, as if connecting pieces in her mind. "And today, that key turned, in the middle of an execution." Darian felt his heartbeat pounding heavier in his chest, and the Aegis immediately displayed a warning about life force expenditure. "If you keep running it at full capacity like you did in the square, you will die," Thalia said sharply. Elion nodded, stepping closer. "There is a right to soften the link, to let the armor sleep halfway without shutting down." "Then do it," Darian said, unlocking his helmet to reveal a sweat-slick face in the blue glow. Thalia stared at him for a moment, as if seeing clearly for the first time the man who had shattered the execution frame above. Elion placed 2 fingers on glowing nodes at the armor's neck, murmuring a string of ancient syllables, each word dimming the Aegis's light. The warning lines in Darian's vision shifted from red to yellow, then pale green, and his heartbeat gradually steadied. "That will do for now," Elion said, withdrawing his hands. "But the divine shield will still react violently when darkness appears." Darian took a deep breath, for the first time since the execution, feeling his lungs not weighted like stone. "Now what?" Darian asked, looking up at the ceiling, full of war and shadow. Thalia turned toward the memory pillar, her eyes hardening. "Now we need proof, about Varric, and about the darkness our ancestors faced." Elion nodded, placing his hand on the crystal and requesting the memory pillar to open records of the Council from recent years. On the crystal's surface appeared an image of Varric in a sealed room, kneeling before a hovering patch of darkness like a crack in the air. A distorted whisper came from the dark patch in the recording. "Vorath hears you, Varric." Darian felt the Aegis raise goosebumps across his skin, despite being damped. Its blue veins flickered tensely. "That is the name the oldest carvings only dared call the shadow between stars," Elion said, paling. Thalia gripped the edge of the stone ring. "How long has Varric been bringing Vorath into the palace?" Darian watched the image of Varric bowing to the darkness and understood this was the kind of proof they could never let disappear quietly. On the surface, Torin stood alone in an auxiliary control room, reviewing energy data from the Judgment Rite on a holo display. The charts showed Varric had raised the energy pulse threshold to a level that could have killed anyone incompatible with the Aegis. Torin clenched his hand, the first thought flashing through his mind. "If the armor hadn't chosen Darian, I would have watched a disguised execution." A young officer named Mireia poked her head in, reporting that Varric had ordered all pursuit teams ready to storm the tunnels after Thalia and Darian. Torin looked at Mireia for a long moment, then simply said, "Prepare, but no one enters without a direct order from me."
With Thalia.
When Mireia left, Torin turned back to the screen and murmured to himself, "I serve the throne, and perhaps the Guardian as well." In the root sanctum below, the ceiling scene shifted to rifts tearing open among the stars, dragging through black, shadowy entities. Darian shuddered as one of the entities pushed close to the mural's camera, revealing hollow eyes identical to what he had just seen in Vorath's recording. The ancient voice rose again. "If the shield fails, Vorath and the hollow flock will consume the life force of Alaris." Thalia turned to Darian, her eyes no longer just those of a princess trying to survive, but of someone choosing an ally for an entire world. "So this isn't just between Alaris and the Federation anymore," Darian said slowly. "It's between Vorath and any world carrying the same keys I do." Thalia nodded, her hand resting lightly on the armor of Darian's arm like a pledge. "If Vorath hunts those keys, Alaris will stand in its way." Elion looked at the 2 younger figures before him, then exhaled. Then we have two tasks: to save Alaris from Vorath and expose Varric to the people. At the edge of the root sanctum, another passage had opened, rimmed with glyphs marking it as a deeper archive. The memory pillar has just opened the archive of the war with the hollow flock for us, Elian said. Darian put his helmet back on, feeling the Aegis wake a notch, as if it knew the next step would bring them closer to Vorath. Talia walked alongside Darian, Elian following, the three of them moving into the new corridor, leaving behind the prophetic ceiling still quietly glowing. The new passage led Darian, Thalia, and Elian down a slope and opened into a wide chamber whose massive stone pillars were scarred with burned cuts. The light from the ceiling crystals here was dimmer, tinged with a bruised purple hue. In the center of the room, a floating metal ring held hundreds of rotating battle fragments, like shards of broken glass. Elian brushed a symbol, and around Darian, Thalia, and Elian appeared the image of an ancient battlefield under a shattered sky. Rifts hung overhead, from which the black hollow flock poured down like an ink storm. At the front line, a warrior in an older Aegis suit surged forward, weaving both hands into a mesh of light that blocked an entire swarm of the hollow flock. Darian felt a familiar shiver as he saw the energy curling around that warrior, in the same way the Aegis had reacted on the execution dais. Thalia pointed at the energy lines running from the armor into the ground, where nearby plants and stones shriveled. "The armor doesn't just drain its bearer," Thalia said. "It drains the environment around it if it has to." Another scene flickered on. The same warrior, after repelling the hollow flock, kneeling in a barren expanse, his skin cracked like ceramic. Elian lowered his head and whispered, "He poured everything into the final fight, and the armor took what was left." Darian swallowed hard and unconsciously placed his hand over his chest, where the Aegis still cradled his heart. "I don't intend to let you become one of those shapes on the ceiling," Talia said, her eyes flicking toward the vaulted roof filled with fallen warriors. The image shifted again, this time to an ancient council hall, where robed figures like Varric argued over whether to awaken the sacred armor again. One voice among them declared, "If we do not use the shield, Vorath will devour Alaris. If we do, we may lose the bearer entirely." Elian slowly shut down the images, leaving the archive chamber submerged again in purplish gloom. "Varric doesn't understand, or doesn't care about, that price," Elian said. Thalia turned to Darian. "We need to get to the surface, bring the proof about Varric and Vorath to those who can still be trusted." Darian nodded, feeling the Aegis shiver in agreement. A new guiding arrow appeared in his vision, pointing up instead of down. Elsewhere in the palace, Varric stood alone in the sealed chamber where he had once knelt before the dark patch, his face twisted with rage. "Tauren slows everything, and Thalia turns that human into a guardian," Varric growled. The dark smear on the wall trembled, widening into a small rift from which Vorath's voice rose, like metal scraping stone. "You promised Asha, Alaris' life force, in exchange for the hollow flock's power," Vorath hissed, stretching each syllable like a blade across bone. Varric swallowed, then replied, "I just need Vorath to help me unmask Thalia and her guardian pawn before the people." From the rift, a small dark halo detached itself, coalescing into a pitch-black orb hanging in the air. "A seed of the hollow flock," Vorath said. "Drop it into the lower layers of the city. It will seek the life force. The shield is stirring." Varric reached out and touched the orb. It was so cold it numbed his arm, yet he still smiled. "Tonight, Valoria will see how Thalia and her human guardian drag calamity to them," Varric muttered. Meanwhile, Darian, Thalia, and Elian followed the Aegis' guidance, climbing stone steps that rose toward Valoria's lowest surface levels. They emerged from a hidden exit behind an abandoned warehouse where dim streetlights fell across a maze of alleys. Valoria at night looked nothing like the splendid square. Cracked walls, old energy conduits, early shuttered markets, and flickering burnt-out hollow ads. Thalia pulled her cloak to hide the royal crest on her chest, while Elian adjusted his hood so no one would recognize him. Darian dimmed the Aegis' brightness, leaving only faint lines for his own interface. "We have to reach an independent comm station before Varric can twist every broadcast," Thalia said. As Darian swept his gaze over the alleys, The Aegis suddenly displayed speckled red dots like noise on the energy map beneath his feet. "Something's wrong," Darian murmured. "The energy under the ground is being pulled off balance." At that same moment, a few blocks away, Varric dropped the hollow flock orb into an energy drain shaft, letting it fall deep into Valoria's guts. The black orb hit the energy grid and shattered into dark wisps that slithered along the conduits like boneless snakes. At a junction, a street lamp flickered violently and died, plunging the corner into thick darkness. Darian watched the red dots clump together on his helmet map, directly beneath the blackout zone. "We need to turn left. Steer clear of that zone," Darian said. But a panicked scream suddenly rose from that very direction. Thalia didn't have time to think. She sprinted toward the scream, cloak whipping behind her. Darian swore and dashed after her, the Aegis instantly boosting sensor power despite being in a damped mode. They plunged into the darkness where only a few hollow signs blinked, and in the middle of the junction, a family of Alaris huddled, surrounded by black ribbons crawling along the ground. The shadow ribbons touched the walls, making the moss and wildflowers shrivel within a few breaths. "A seed form of the hollow flock," Ilion exhaled. "Varric has called them here." One shadow ribbon suddenly snapped up, latching onto the father's ankle and turning his skin gray in an instant. Darian didn't hesitate, raising his hand to let the Aegis pour energy into a wall of light between the shadows and the family. The shadow strands hit the light wall, shrieking as if burned, recoiling yet thickening along its edges. Red warnings immediately flashed in Darian's vision. Life force consumption, rising rapidly. Recommend reducing output. "You can't hold it like that for long," Thalia shouted, pulling the Alaris children back into a safer corner. Darian gritted his teeth, feeling each heartbeat squeezed by the Aegis in exchange for the wall's thickness. "Let me try," Ilion said, placing his hand on the inner side of the light wall and chanting an ancient verse to stabilize the energy. The light wall stopped flickering, shifting to a steady blue-white, and the warnings in Darian's view fell from red to orange. But the shadow strands seemed to sense the change. They recoiled into a dense black mass and shot up over the rooftops, seeking a path around. "They're circling behind," Darian said, as the Aegis sensors plotted the hollow flock mass on a three-dimensional map. Thalia clenched her jaw. "How long can you hold the wall?" "Long enough for one counterstrike," Darian said, abruptly pulling the wall into a smaller shield in front of his hand and focusing energy into his palm. He vaulted onto the side wall, kicked off it, and used the armor's strength to launch himself onto the rooftop, where the black mass was coiling. On the rooftop, the hollow flock mass turned, opening a black mouth like a pit, a freezing gust slamming into the Aegis like invisible claws. Darian roared and punched straight forward, releasing a focused burst of energy like a spear that drove through the black mass. The black mass shattered into hundreds of fragments, but each fragment thinned into a streak that darted toward cracks in walls and pipes. "Not good," Ilion said from below, staring up as the black streaks spread across the district. The Aegis shook around Darian, reporting, "Life force depletion, critical. Environmental energy, insufficient to compensate." His head spun and his knees buckled, forcing him to brace a hand on the roof to keep from falling. Thalia climbed up the rusty metal stairs and rushed to catch Darian just as he staggered toward the roof's edge. "You're letting it eat you alive," Thalia said, dragging Darian back to the center of the roof. Elion appeared at the roof's edge, panting. "If you keep using the Aegis like a siege cannon, it will treat your life force as endless ammunition." Darian looked up, cold sweat running down his temples as the Aegis tried to throttle itself back to a lower drain. "I can't just stand and watch others get drained," Darian said, his voice hoarse. Thalia leaned in, touching her forehead gently to Darian's through the helmet edge, an Alaris gesture of intimacy. "No one said you should stand and watch," Thalia said softly. "But you need to live long enough to fight more than one battle." Elion added, "The Aegis responds to emotion too. Rage and fear push consumption to the max. We need to learn to feed it other feelings." Thalia frowned. "You saw it stabilize in the root sanctum during the rite, when there wasn't just fear, but trust." Darian exhaled a long breath, feeling his heartbeat begin to sync with the Aegis's soft vibration instead of being dragged by it. Below, the Alaris family, urged by Thalia, ran toward a nearby shelter as curious residents began spilling out to see what had happened. Rumors will spread quickly, Ilion said quietly. Some will say they saw a guardian fighting darkness. Others will call it a bad omen. Thalia lifted her gaze to Valoria's sky, where some stars were hidden by city haze, her eyes glinting with cold resolve. Varric will try to spin this as proof that you bring calamity, Thalia said. We have to reach the Spire relay before he does. Darian straightened, feeling the Aegis settle into quiet armor rather than a storm in his veins. In a hidden corner of the palace, Varric stood before a holoscreen, reviewing grainy pipe sensor footage of holoflock streaks spreading and the rooftop flare. Good, Varric murmured. Now I just need a few spliced clips, a few speeches, and Valoria will believe Thalia brought demons home. Vorath whispered from a small rift beside him. As long as you keep loosening the boundaries, the hollow flock will do the rest. On the rooftop, unaware of Varric, Darian looked down at Valoria as if seeing for the first time how beautiful and fragile the city truly was. After the rooftop battle, Darian, Thalia, and Elion crossed rusted metal roofs, heading toward the slender shape of the Spire relay, stabbing into Valoria's sky. On his visor, Darian saw the whole city as a trembling energy grid, with countless small red dots spreading through it like a disease. Vorath is planting its seeds everywhere, Darian said hoarsely. But if we stop at every red dot, we'll never reach the relay. Thalia bit her lip, her gaze sweeping over the poor blocks below, where flickering lights played across tired Alaris' faces. If we don't break Varric's news chokehold, all those people will only see you as catastrophe, Thalia replied. Ilion climbed, panting. The Spire relay still uses ancient protocols. If we reach the core, we can broadcast memory sanctum data live. They jumped down onto a lower terrace, where wall-mounted holo-ads suddenly flickered, and all shifted to Varric's face. This is an emergency declaration from the Council, Varric's voice boomed, magnified through the city's aging speakers. The holo-image showed a spliced version of the rooftop battle, Darian firing energy blasts, but none of him shielding the Alaris family. The alien wearing the sacred armor has drawn the hollow flock to Valoria, Varric said, staring into the camera as if into every citizen's eyes. Thalia gripped the rooftop ledge, going pale as Varric named her as the one who hid this danger from the people. A brief shot of bound Celine flashed in the report, captioned as an informant who had been compromised by the alien entity. He's using Celine too, Darian growled, slamming his armored fist into the rooftop wall, sending chips of stone flying. Elion laid a hand on Darian's arm urgently. Anger only feeds the armor faster. Let Varric shoot himself in the foot when we air the originals. Deep in the palace, Torin stood behind the camera rigs, face expressionless, while Varric continued, his speech about rewarding anyone who reports the Guardian. Mireia stood beside Torin and whispered, General, the Spire relay's backup channel still hasn't been locked by Varric. Torin didn't look at her, only said quietly, if someone used it to broadcast something Varric doesn't want seen, you would know nothing about it. Understood, Mireia. Mireia swallowed, then nodded, a spark of resolve in her eyes. Understood, General Torin. On the roof, Thalia turned to Darian. Torin won't sit still. If he's still on the throne side, we'll have a shot at the Spire relay. Darian nodded, tightening the strap on his shoulder plate. Then we race Varric to see who claims the airwaves first. They slid down a metal stair and merged with the tired crowd heading home after night shifts, trying to make Darian's armor pass as heavy industrial gear. A few suspicious eyes lingered on the faint blue veins of the Aegis, but Thalia quickly obscured them by pulling Darian close, as if he were merely her personal bodyguard. I came here a few times as a child, Thalia murmured. The Spire relay has a maintenance entrance the palace likes to pretend doesn't exist. They turned into a narrow alley, where the Spire relay's massive base rose from the city like a white bone column. Amid tangled conduits and regulators, Thalia pointed to a small rusted steel door with no official markings. Maintenance Gate X9, Ilion whispered, recognizing the faint symbol on the frame. It was used by tech priests in King Alaron's time. Darian placed his armored hand on the mechanical lock panel, letting the Aegis scan it. A moment later, the bolts clicked open as if obeying a very old command. The armor recognizes the architectural signature, Elion said with mingled awe and fear. Our ancestors built this relay around the same energy language. The door swung open, revealing a cramped service tunnel full of cables and heat, leading straight toward the heart of the Spire relay. They climbed upward as the air grew dry and thin, the thrum of signal amplifiers echoing around them like the heartbeat of the entire city. On the relay's auxiliary control level, Engineer Jalen sat at his console and started when a priority code arrived on Torin's military channel. The brief message contained only one line. If future Queen Thalia and the Guardian arrive at the relay, aid them at all costs. Jalen swallowed, wiped the message history, then looked up to see an internal map showing a maintenance entrance just activated. All right, Torin, Jalen muttered. I'll see how much I can do before Varric notices. Darian, Thalia, and Elion stepped out of the service corridor door into a vast circular chamber where blue data columns shot up to the ceiling like falling rain in reverse. This is the amplification core, Elion whispered. A global pulse from here will reach every hollow on Alaris, and pushed further. Even the Federation channels, the Aegis, automatically traced a glowing path on the floor, leading to a main interface pillar, whose surface resembled a smaller memory pillar. Thalia drew a small storage crystal from her robes, a compressed copy of the root sanctum data Elion had extracted before they left. This is what Varric doesn't want anyone to see, Thalia said, handing the crystal to Darian. Darian pressed the crystal into a slot on the interface pillar and felt the Aegis and the Spire shudder together like two heartbeats aligning. On Jalen's screen, red alerts flared. Unauthenticated signal preparing for global broadcast. Jalen bit his lip, tapped a flurry of commands, and relabeled the signal as internal diagnostic so the system wouldn't auto-block it. All right, you three, Jalen muttered at the display showing Darian, Thalia, and Elion's position. Thalia and Darian's signal is clear for 15 more seconds. After that, I can't guarantee. In the core, Elion laid his hand on the pillar, his voice trembling. Transmit root sanctum, complete prophecy, Varric's conversation with Vorath, and the Holoflock records. The Aegis responded with a line before Darian's eyes. Protective amplification mode. Engaged. Emotional link required. Emotional link? Darian muttered, just as Thalia took his hand, slipping her fingers between the cold armor plates. Let this city hear truth through us, not through Varric, Thalia said, her eyes fixed on the brightening data pillar. Darian focused on the feeling of trust and resolve he shared with Thalia, instead of the rage that wanted to smash Varric's face. The data columns around them flared, launching thousands of blue streams into the holoclouds blanketing the city. In squares and alleys, holos playing Varric's speech jerked, then switched to the memory pillar, showing Varric kneeling before Vorath. Uproar erupted. Some shouted forgery, others trembled, pointing at the screen where Vorath hissed Varric's name. In her cell, Celine snapped her head up as the small wall holo changed too, her eyes widening at the sight of Varric bowing to the dark rift. Torin, still in the auxiliary control room, let out a dry laugh as he saw Varric's face freeze on the internal monitors. You've set yourself on fire, Varric, Torin murmured, then switched the internal comms to silent monitoring to hear the troops' reactions. But in the Spire's core, a new warning flashed on Darian's interface. External source attempting priority override. ID, Varric. The data pillar shook violently, and holos across the city began glitching between Varric kneeling and Varric screaming, Treason! Darian gritted his teeth and poured more feeling into the link. Life force warnings slid back toward yellow, but the signal held steady for a few more seconds. Enough, Thalia said, pulling Darian's hand from the pillar. The people have seen too much to forget. If you fall here, Vorath wins. The data torrent subsided, and holos fell into heavy static before going dark. Both Varric and their feed shoved off the air. Elion staggered, gripping the pillar, whispering, We planted the seed, but Varric will strike back immediately. Immediately, the Aegis produced a new alert. Armed units approaching. ID, Varric's Royal Wardens. On the lower levels, steel doors slid open, and squads of black-armored troops bearing Varric's Snake Eye insignia marched into the relay with weapons ready. "We're trapped in the tower," Darian said, his voice dropping back into combat mode. "And besides Varric, Vorath won't ignore what we just did, either." As if answering, the whole tower shuddered again, this time from outside. The Aegis reported, "Minor spatial instability detected at tower base." Outside, the hollow flock streaks Darian had shattered earlier were converging into a dark cloud, wrapping around the base of the spire relay. Thalia glanced at Darian, her blue eyes catching the data glow. Varric will strike from within, Vorath from without. The next chapter of this nightmare has just begun. Armored footsteps echoed from the lower levels, rolling through the spire relay's core like war drums closing in on Darian, Thalia, and Elion. The Aegis marked each of Varric's Royal Warden squads as red blips climbing the three-dimensional map in Darian's view. "We have a few minutes at most," Darian said, his voice back to the cold edge of a commander. Thalia glanced around the circular core chamber, measuring the spans between catwalks, her eyes calculating an escape route for the three of them. Elion swallowed, his hand still resting on the interface pillar, warm from the broadcast they had just forced through. Jalen's voice suddenly came over the ceiling intercom. "If you three are the ones who just kicked Varric off the air, then listen up." Darian looked up as the Aegis automatically tagged the signal source as Jalen, station engineer. "I just received orders to arrest you," Jalen continued. "But I owe Torin more than I owe Varric." Thalia did not miss a beat. "Jalen, this is Thalia. If you help us out of the tower, you're saving all of Valoria from Vorath, not betraying Alaris." There was a brief silence. Then Jalen said, "Emergency exit E3 leads to the tower apex, an external maintenance bay. I'll lock doors behind you as long as I can." The Aegis instantly painted a glowing arrow on the floor, pointing toward a door marked E3 behind a data column. "Move," Darian said, taking Thalia's hand and pulling her along, while Elion hurried after them as if afraid to miss a step. On a lower level, a steel door that had just opened for one squad of Varric's Royal Wardens slammed shut in their faces as Jalen's override re-engaged the locks. "Someone's tampering with the system," one warden growled over the encrypted channel to Varric. Varric, standing in a private control room linked to the tower, narrowed his eyes at warnings of unauthorized internal access, blinking on his screen. "Lock every exit to the tower summit," Varric ordered. "If Thalia and that Guardian are inside, we'll drown them in this relay." Outside, the hollow flock cloud coiled around the tower's base began to climb like a black flood, clinging to exposed Asha conduits. The Aegis vibrated around Darian, displaying a new warning. "Hollow flock contact with tower Asha frame. Resonance risk." "Vorath is trying to turn the whole tower into a cracked antenna," Elion said, voice shaking as he read data on a side display. "Keep running," Thalia replied, her hand never leaving the rail as the incline steepened. "If we reach the top, we'll at least have space to fight back." They rounded a landing and ran straight into the first Royal Warden squad, energy rifles lifting as one to aim at Darian, Thalia, and Elion. "Hold your fire," Thalia shouted, stepping in front of Darian and making several wardens hesitate. "Lady, Thalia," one warden stammered, his voice distorted by the helmet.
"Darian."
"Varric said you're controlled by that entity." "Varric kneels to that thing, not me," Thalia answered, pointing up to where small stairway hollows still flickered with traces of the memory pillar. A warden at the back murmured on a private channel. "I saw that image in the square. It's not the kind of thing you fake that fast."
"We are here."
"Silence and arrest them now!" Varric roared over the command channel, his voice slicing across every frequency like a cold blade. The rifle barrels rose again, but at the same time the wall beside Darian cracked as a small dark smear slipped through, like smoke sucked into the room. The filamentous hollow flock coiled around a warden's legs, crawling up his black armor to cling to Varric's snake eye emblem as if swallowing it. The soldier screamed, firing wildly into the wall as his eyes behind the visor dimmed into two bottomless pits. "Vorath is borrowing his armor," Elion cried, pressing back against Darian's spine. Darian immediately shoved Talia and Elion aside as the Aegis swelled into a curved shield covering half the stairwell. The Warden's energy rounds bent on the Aegis lattice, streaking into the ceiling like green meteors. The Warden, seized by the hollow flock, growled, reaching out with hands now strung with darkness to smash at the light wall, making the Aegis vibrate through every muscle in Darian's body. Warnings flashed again. Life force drain rising. But this time Darian forced his mind to stay anchored to Thalia's hand, resting on his back. The Aegis shifted from harsh white to a softer blue, easing the pressure on Darian's heart while the shield held firm. He's holding the drain in check with trust, Elion stammered, hardly believing the numbers dancing on his handheld. Thalia slid to the side, pointing at the Wardens not yet touched by the flock. If you still believe in Alaris, fall back. It's Vorath wrapped around your comrade's armor. Two Wardens in the back glanced at each other, then stepped down a stair, lowering their guns and leaving the possessed one as Vorath's living shield. Darian dropped the shield in a single breath and lunged at Aegis speed, his armored hand clamping onto the helmet of the Warden, taken by the flock. He didn't fire, but pushed energy into his palm, letting Aegis blue light flood across the faceplate like a purifying flame. The hollow flock shrieked, ripping out of the armor like smoke in a gale, spiraling away into cracks and leaving the soldier collapsed and gasping. "Fall back!" another Warden shouted, dragging the stunned comrade down the stairs, his eyes no longer daring to meet Darian's. "Go!" Talia said, grabbing Elion's hand while Darian turned back to raise a thin barrier at their backs to slow any pursuit. They threw themselves up the final steps, their breathing merging with the relay's heartbeat as it shuddered under the flock tightening around its frame outside. Finally, they burst through a thick metal door into the open-air maintenance deck atop the tower, where Valoria's night wind whipped their faces like a cold lash. Around them, arrays of antennas, emitters, and power stacks trembled under the invisible hand of the flock, constricting the tower's base. At the tower's base, the hollow flock cloud was now as thick as a black storm, tongues of shadow licking upward to swallow the relay's shaft. Vorath's voice rose from deep within the storm. "You used my tower to expose my hand to the prey. Now I will use it to tear your world open." Darian clenched his fist, feeling the Aegis quiver in answer to the challenge, each glowing vein on the armor sharpening under the hollow blue light. If Vorath is using the tower's Asha frame as a groove to carve reality, we need to turn that Asha into padding instead, Elion said, staring at the antenna banks. "You want me to use the Aegis not to fire, but to pad the Asha channels?" Darian asked, tasting the new word. Elion nodded rapidly. "Your armor speaks the same language as the tower's frame. If you send a protective pattern through it, the flock will slide off the groove." Talia stepped forward, cupping both sides of Darian's helmet to force him to look straight at her, amid the night wind and the flock's malevolent glow. "Let the Aegis carry your voice to Valoria," Talia said softly. "Not the shouting of anger, but the promise that you will protect us." Darian closed his eyes for a rare heartbeat in the midst of battle, thinking of Thalia, of Elion, of bound Selene, and the ordinary faces he had just saved from the flock. He opened his eyes, spread his arms as if to embrace the entire tower, and let the Aegis pull the Asha flows in, not to drain them, but to retune their rhythm. The lines on his armor linked with the tower's energy bands, forming a dense web that radiated around Valoria like a net of light. At the tower's base, the hollow flock screamed as the Asha grooves they clung to suddenly turned slick, making the shadow tongues slide off the frame like waves off polished rock. Part of the flock was pushed outward, thinning into ribbons around the cloud layer, no longer dense enough to punch through reality, at least for tonight. The Aegis roared in Darian's ears. "Life force drain high but stable. Estimated sustained time, 10 seconds. "That's enough," Elion shouted over the wind. "You've reshaped the grooves. Vorath will need time to adjust." Talia pulled Darian's arms down, helping him draw the Aegis back into a silent armor state as the tower's lights gently faded. Darian's knees dipped for a moment, but this time he didn't fall. The Aegis had learned to be a little less greedy. "Well done." Vorath growled from the dispersing storm. "Instead of one big fracture, you have given me thousands of fine cracks to test." "Then test them," Darian replied, his voice hoarse but steady. "We'll stand in front of every crack, every time you knock." Just then, the maintenance hatch blew open and another group of royal wardens poured in, guns aimed straight at the three of them. "Hold it!" another voice shouted from behind the wardens. And Jalen appeared, holding his handheld console aloft like a white flag. "That's the latest order from Torin," Jalen said, tossing a hollow warrant into the air where the throne's seal and the line, "Do not fire on Thalia," appeared. Several wardens faltered, glancing from Torin's order to Varric's snake-eye crest on their shoulders, as if torn between two oaths. "If you want to arrest someone, arrest me," Jalen said, stepping fully in front of Darian, Talia, and Elian. "But if you shoot them, this tower collapses when there's no one left who understands it." Over the comm system, Varric hissed, "Take all four alive. I want them hanging in the square as an example." Talia quickly scanned the maintenance deck and spotted a row of white technician escape pods slotted under the tower's rim like seeds on a trunk. "Jalen, are those pods still functional?" Talia asked quickly, her eyes never leaving the slowly advancing wardens. "If I bypass a few safeties, yes," Jalen replied, his fingers already flying across the handheld. Darian stepped sideways to stand between Thalia, Elion, Jalen, and the gun barrels, the aegis dimming until only thin lines like moonlit claws remained. "You can't block them forever," Thalia said, her hand already on a pod hatch, ready to open it. "Just long enough," Darian replied, then pushed power into the floor, sending out a shock ring that staggered the wardens. Jalen shouted, "Pods 1, 2, 3 primed," and released the mechanical catches, each bay popping open like a white bud. "Elion goes with Jalen," Talia ordered. "Darian with me. We split so Varric has trouble tracking us." Elion swallowed and jumped into a pod with Jalen, while Thalia hauled Darian toward the remaining bay, her eyes never leaving the wardens. As they regained their footing, a warden yelled, "Shoot the pods!" But the Aegis raised a small shield in time to deflect the volley sideways. "Go!" Talia shouted, punching the launch control, and her pod with Darian inside shot away from the tower, dropping into Valoria's night like a white meteor. Jalen and Elion's pod fired along a different trajectory, veering toward the industrial district and splitting the black sky with a second white trail. On the tower roof, Varric's royal wardens could only fire after the receding streaks, while the flock circled uselessly around the Asha frame Darian had just glazed. Far away in the palace, Varric watched two pod signals diverge on a tactical screen, his fist clenching until his knuckles went white. "Run, Thalia," Vorath whispered into his ear through the wall's small rift. "The farther they run, the more they stretch this world's Asha for me." Varric smiled coldly. "Then I'll let them live a while longer, just to have more Asha strands to cut." In the cramped pod, Thalia leaned against the hull, still gripping Darian's hand as Valoria spun outside the round viewport. "Your diplomatic welcome is unforgettable," Darian murmured, one corner of his mouth lifting despite the exhaustion in his eyes. Thalia laughed softly, though her eyes still held the specter of the flock and Varric's exposed face on the memory pillar. "The diplomatic welcome was only the first chapter," Talia said, looking down at the city swelling beneath them. "The rest of the story has only just begun."